Network webinar series. This morning we're going to be talking about volunteering and employment, and we're really excited because this is the first time that we've actually invited all three of our audiences to join the same call. So we're going to be covering information for individual volunteers, for nonprofits, and for companies this morning. My name is Lauren Wagner, and I'm the Business Development Manager here at Volunteer Match, and I'm going to be helping to get us started this morning and facilitate things. Also in the room with me at Volunteer Match is Sherry Elson, who is our Senior Manager of Online Communications at Volunteer Match, and also our special guest moderator, Greg Baldwin, who's our Fearless Leader and President at Volunteer Match. So we have a lot of really great information to cover today, but first let's just go through a few housekeeping items. So we're going to be saving some time at the end of the presentation to pose your questions to the presenters, and there's a few different ways that you can go about getting those questions to us during the presentation. The first way is by typing your questions into the box on the right-hand side of your screen in the GoToMeeting panel. The second way is through Twitter by tweeting to @VM_solutions using the hashtag VMBPN. So we're going to be kind of compiling those throughout the presentation, and we'll save some time at the end to ask the presenters. Also, just so everybody knows on the call, a copy of the slides and a link to the recorded webinar will be circulated after the live event this morning. So you're going to have access to all of this information afterward. So as I mentioned, we do have a lot of ground to cover in this hour, so I'm not going to delay anymore, and I'm going to go ahead and hand things over to Greg Baldwin to get us started.
Great. Well, thanks, Lauren, and thank you all for joining us today. We've got a terrific lineup of experts from all over the nonprofit, government, and corporate space. We're going to give them each an opportunity to introduce a little bit the organizations. But I just want to say it's a pleasure to have all of them here. We've got Robin and Mary from the Corporation for National Community Service. We have Alison from LinkedIn. She's the Social Impact Manager at LinkedIn and works on the LinkedIn for Good project. And we're also delighted to have Jill from Deloitte, who is the head of corporate citizenship at Deloitte. And I'm just going to give each of them an opportunity to talk a little bit about their company, just an introduction, and their interest in kind of volunteering and employment, and kind of why they're here today. So do you want to get started, Alison? Say hello.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Greg. I'm Alison Dorsey. I'm, as Greg said, the Social Impact Manager here at LinkedIn. And so, you know, LinkedIn is the world's largest online professional network with over 259 million members. And our business day-to-day is to connect talent with opportunity. And what we've really been doing at LinkedIn for Good is expanding the thought of what that means, like what kind of talent and what kind of opportunities. And so my role as a Social Impact Manager is focused on connecting our members with opportunities to increase their social impact and then represent that impact on their LinkedIn profile. So that's really in expanding the concept of talent into being not just employees, but also volunteers and board members and donors and general supporters, and then increasing opportunities from just jobs to also volunteer and board opportunities.
Thanks for joining us this morning, Alison. I know you're having a busy day today, and I'm glad you can spend an hour talking with us about this subject. Jill, are you out there?
I am. Hi. Deloitte is the largest professional services firm in the world, and we strive to do what we do best in professional services to help strengthen charitable organizations so that they can address our nation's most pressing social issues. And I have the privilege of running our West Region's corporate citizenship, which includes philanthropy, board service, and volunteerism. And I also run our national pro bono practice, which is in the midst of delivering $110 million worth of pro bono work to nonprofits.
Thanks, Jill. And now we have two folks, two for the price of one, from the Corporation for National Community Service. Robin and Mary, you want to introduce yourselves?
Hi, thanks. Yeah, this is Mary Hyde with the Corporation for National Community Service, and I'm here with my colleague, Robin Gertner.
Hi, everyone.
And for those of you who may not be familiar with our work, since 1993, CNCS has been the lead federal agency supporting national service and volunteerism in our country. Our primary programs include AmeriCorps, Senior Corps, the Social Innovation Fund, and the Volunteer Generation Fund. We have over 5 million Americans engaged in service, 4.7 million volunteers are recruited and managed by our programs. And in addition to our primary programs, we conduct research on service and volunteerism that helps shape our national debate on how volunteering can best support communities, individuals, and our country as a whole.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Our pleasure.
So our conversation today is really on the connection between volunteering and employment. And I think, I know certainly from Volunteer Match's experience and probably a lot of the folks that are dialed into the webinar, there's always a bit of a tension between volunteering and the workplace environment in many people's minds. It's kind of an either-or type equation. You're either have a job or you're volunteering. And I think there's kind of many myths and generalizations that we've all come to believe regarding the relationship between volunteering and employment. And recent research is really challenging a lot of those myths, that volunteering and employment aren't kind of an either-or. They're much more of an and they tend to be more complementary, certainly than perhaps people have thought in the past. So we're delighted to push into that particular subject and take a look at it through three very different lenses. So the first lens that we're going to take a look at is kind of looking at it through the lens of the volunteer or the individual, and take a look at some of the trends and facts and research and benefits that are really accruing to the individual, and how the relationship between volunteering and employment really works through that lens. And to get us started, just with some high-level information and some of the work that's being done today over at LinkedIn, I'd like to start with Alison and have you give a quick little overview on kind of the benefits to a volunteer as it regards kind of their employment prospects and how LinkedIn's thinking about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned the tension, Greg, because I think it's important to acknowledge it, and we hear a lot from our members of this fear that if they add their volunteering to their profile, it's not going to look like they're working as hard, or that it's going to show that they weren't employed in that period of time if they're full-time volunteering. And so we did a lot of research to see if these issues or concerns were really founded in the opinions of hiring managers on our network. And what we found is that 42% of hiring managers on LinkedIn consider work experience, consider volunteering experience the same as work experience when they're considering a candidate. So if someone volunteered and made a graphic design for a nonprofit, they'll consider that graphic design work experience when they're looking to hire a graphic designer. So it's been really encouraging to see. We've also found that a fifth of the hiring managers on LinkedIn hired someone specifically because of their volunteer experience. So it's been a big leg up in that process. And so the volunteering causes field is really the core of representing that volunteerism on LinkedIn. We created this section in 2011, and it was really the company saying that we think that your volunteer experience, the organizations you support, the causes you care about are a core aspect of your professional identity, and so they should be on your LinkedIn profile with all other parts of that identity. And to date, over 3 million members have added this section. And one interesting thing has been how it's affected their use of LinkedIn for their jobs separate from their volunteerism. We see that a lot of business development conversations, someone's trying to talk to a new contact and find a point of connection, and frequently people point to things like their education or their past work experience. But if they can point to a shared cause or passion, that is much more helpful in establishing that new relationship. So it's been very helpful for people across the board. And we just actually added this field. So on the next slide, we have the profile signal. This is a brand new part of the field we added a couple months ago. The reason that we did this was a lot of the members that were using the volunteering causes section were saying that they want to tell nonprofits to get in touch with them, that they're interested in joining a nonprofit board, they're interested in skilled volunteering. So we added this portion of the volunteering causes section a couple months ago to do that. And we've seen 600,000 members add it in the last couple months, which has been, it was 5,000 I think when I made the slide, so it's changing every day. And so it's exciting to see how many people not only say that they want to volunteer, 82% of our members have told us they want to volunteer, but now members are taking the extra step to telling the world that they want to volunteer and just giving that open door to nonprofits to reach out to them. And here on the next slide, we have a story about one of these members. So the main reason that we added the profile signal and that you all can add it is to tell your network that you're interested in volunteering or board service and letting nonprofits know that they should reach out to you. And so Jupe Rubens was one of the members who was approached by a nonprofit on LinkedIn. He was contacted by a social enterprise called Uhambo that works to extend wheelchair access in South Africa. And they were looking for a fund manager with experience in African nonprofits, and Jupe just came up in their search. They had no connection with him, and they reached out to him to discuss board opportunities, and he was so thrilled to be approached. And it's such a great example that you don't need to be nervous about the cold call or the cold email or in-mail on LinkedIn, because members get so excited when they're approached with an opportunity to volunteer, especially the ones that have already said on their profile that they want to do that.
That's great.
And then our big announcement today that Greg kind of
drum roll, please.
Earlier, the volunteer marketplace. So for the past several months, we've been testing how our members react to volunteer postings in LinkedIn as formatted the same way as a job opportunity appearing in their jobs you may be interested in section. And members have been so thrilled about this. And so we launched this new site today where you can go find volunteer opportunities. And we're really thrilled to be partnering with Volunteer Match on it and just exploring together how LinkedIn can best support the volunteer ecosystem that already exists. And we want to support the way it exists and then continue to extend that to the rest of our members that are interested in volunteering and not yet taking the steps to do so. So we just want to put those volunteer opportunities right in front of them.
Yeah, we're excited about it too, and I want to, snaps to LinkedIn. I know about 2 years ago, Reid Hoffman invited about 10 or 15 leaders from the nonprofit sector to talk about what LinkedIn could do to really strengthen the kind of cultural norms around volunteering. And the addition of the volunteering and causes field on LinkedIn was a direct result of that meeting, where we brainstormed together with LinkedIn. And one of the things that became obvious to those in the room was that LinkedIn is really representing how people are presenting their professional lives on the web these days, and not having volunteering be a part of that online resume, that online reputation was a real missing piece in kind of the LinkedIn infrastructure. So we're delighted and excited to continue to push these things, and really it demonstrates in a real-world way, not just simply in research, the strong connection that LinkedIn believes exists, particularly in their world, between volunteering and employment. So let's keep pushing the conversation along, and I know Deloitte has done quite a bit of research over the years on workplace volunteering, skill-based volunteering, and the relationship between volunteering and employment. And Jill, I'd love for you to elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, I'd love to, Greg. I'm going to be talking mostly with regards to our 2013 Volunteer Impact Survey. But first, congrats, Alison, on LinkedIn's launch of the Volunteer Marketplace. I, too, think it's just going to be, it's phenomenal and a missing piece right now. Well, so Deloitte helps people and communities thrive in 3 key ways. First, we aim to leverage innovative thinking to strengthen nonprofit capacity. We help with strategic, operational, and financial challenges. Secondly, we complement that work with financial investments. And lastly, we create and share new research, and that gets to today. And hopefully that can help organizations, in this case, leverage skills-based volunteerism. Our Deloitte Volunteer Impact Research Series is a key component of our commitment to building the case for and advancing the dialogue about corporate skills-based volunteerism. And all the surveys are externally available. And we see our most recent findings as adding to other important national research on volunteerism, notably what we'll hear today from the Corporation of National and Community Service. This survey, the 2013 survey, is the 9th in a series of research studies, and we're exploring the impact of key volunteerism issues. We always want to be topical, and the high unemployment rate is of real concern to us. What I'll be focusing on shares insights from HR professionals, college seniors, and returning military personnel, where we further explore how skills-based volunteering influences hiring decisions and the degree to which college seniors and returning military personnel view skilled volunteering as a way to secure gainful employment. Can you go to the next slide?
Sure.
Despite recent progress, unemployment remains a challenge, obviously, for our country, and it's an important issue among college grads and returning military veterans. With over half of college grads working jobs that don't require degrees, the unemployment rate for 20 to 24-year-olds is particularly high, and an increasing percentage of adults with college degrees are looking for jobs, and many of whom are carrying college-related debt. Many millennials are looking for new ways to impress hiring managers. And, of course, there's a huge influx of returning veterans seeking employment. Our 2013 survey finds that skills-based volunteering not only has the potential to increase the competencies of volunteers over time, but it also provides an edge for future employment opportunities, essentially indicating that skills-based volunteering could serve as a bridge to employment. HR executives agree that skills-based volunteering enhances the job prospects for graduating college seniors and returning vets. For instance, 91% of HR executives felt that it would be valuable for college grads to volunteer at nonprofits in order to develop or improve their work skills and marketability. And a previous impact study that we did found that skills-based volunteering provided opportunities to develop business skills, including decision-making, problem-solving, leadership, and negotiation skills. And you see on the next slide, of those who volunteered, an overwhelming majority of college seniors and returning military personnel enjoyed their nonprofit volunteering experience. Yet, despite challenging economic times, less than half of those folks think of volunteering at a nonprofit as a way for them to develop skills that make them more employable. So it makes sense to consider volunteer bridging as a tool early on in the job search process. Moreover, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, why do you think there's such a disconnect? I mean, it's a startling fact, 91% of HR managers think it makes a difference, and yet 46% of college seniors are thinking it will make a difference. Is it just education?
I think it is. I think we're sort of at a tipping point right now, and where we see this marketplace being built by LinkedIn, and folks are understanding that HR executives are actually looking at this, and LinkedIn provides a field. I think we're at just a crossroads right now. So I think, I think this will shift quickly, hopefully, as people become aware.
Right, that we have too many people that don't accept it as the norm at this point.
Yeah, exactly, and I would hope that would change as people discover it.
That's really, really interesting. Thank you. Did you have? Did I cut you off before you made your grand final point?
No, Greg, you didn't. That was perfect.
That's really, really, really great research. Fascinating. I'm still startled by the 91% of HR managers. I mean, it's not like any survey that gets past 60% of anything is remarkable. And for there to be such a consensus that it's a valuable thing for candidates to do is really great. Now we have more of the same, more kind of a slightly different take, but I'm delighted that the corporation is here to talk a little bit about some of the research that they've done that really complements some of the research that's been done by Deloitte. And Mary, you going to take us away, or Robin?
Robin will take us away.
All right.
I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the research that we have done and some of the research that other folks have done really around the world on these topics, which are so crucial these days. Research has generally shown that volunteering is associated with a number of benefits to individuals. Some of the research that we've conducted and that I'll be talking about show that volunteers have a higher likelihood of finding work, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. And research has also shown that employers, as we've heard from the other presenters, employers view volunteer work if it's in a related field. There was a study conducted on a group of researchers that found, on a group of recruiters that found they value paid work and volunteer work exactly the same as long as it's something that's related to the job that's being applied to. I think that's really important for people to think about.
Right.
One important thing to kind of a note of caution on research is that this is a very active area these days. There's a lot of work going on. There's a lot of digging to figure out what is really going on behind the scenes here. So we don't have a lot of conclusive findings yet, but there is typically a modest relationship between volunteer and employment found among a lot of different studies. One really important thing to think about with a lot of the research that's happened is the effect of volunteering on finding a job depends on the reasons that the individual volunteers. So why you volunteer is going to be tied to whether you get a job from that experience. So as we saw with the Deloitte study a moment ago, half of college seniors or half of military personnel thought about volunteering to build their skills. So for those individuals that didn't see it as a way to build their skills, they may not be getting the full benefit of volunteering, whereas those that are actively volunteering to get a job, they may have a higher chance of getting employment out of there. So motivation is really important to think about. Why don't we move on to the next slide? This is kind of a framework that we use to think about how volunteering gets you a job. So how this relationship actually takes place. So an individual decides to volunteer, and when they volunteer, a lot is going on with that experience. They're increasing their social networks, so who they know, who they relate to in a professional capacity. They're increasing their skills and experience, so they're learning how to do new things or learning new ways to do things. And then the decision to volunteer does another thing which is really important. It sends a signal to people about you as an individual. So just like with the LinkedIn profile, you can put in there, you know, I volunteer at such organization, or a lot of people on the resume put that on there. From an HR manager side, from an employer side, when you see that an individual has volunteered, that means something about that individual. Maybe it means they're an outgoing person, they're motivated, they're passionate about something. Maybe it means that they're willing to go the extra mile. So these are all things that volunteering kind of tells other people more than just, oh, this person knows how to do this, or this person knows a lot of people. It's something about their personality. Mm-hmm. So each of those three factors can help you get a job, obviously. If you increase your social networks, that increases your relationships, and those ties can then lead to a job. And we see this happen a lot. Increasing skills and experience, so it can make you all of a sudden qualified for a position you may not have been qualified before. And then the last part again is sending this signal to people that you are something about your personality which may be really necessary to kind of get your foot in the door.
Right.
So our study, which we released over the summer, found that individuals that volunteered after being out of work, so this is folks that they were working, they lost their job, or they're newly entered into the labor force, they had a 27% higher odds of finding work after being out of work, higher than those that don't volunteer. And what's even more startling to us is that this relationship is even stronger for folks that don't have a high school degree and for folks that live in rural areas. So if you didn't have a high school degree, you're out of work, you're looking for a job, and you volunteer, those individuals who volunteered had 50% higher chance of getting the job. Same story for those in rural areas. This is a study that we conducted based off of data collected by the U.S. Census. It's nationally representative. It takes 15 years of data. So this is when the economy was booming, when the economy was in a bust. People from all over the country, rural areas, urban areas, from the north, south, east, west. So this is really powerful findings.
Yeah, and I know you're conscientious about reminding everyone that the research is not conclusive and that we're still digging into this, but this research study was a pretty comprehensive study that tapped into some really big data sets. It wasn't like you calling up your friends or some people that you knew in your neighborhood. It was a national study based on the Bureau of Labor Statistics research that is the same research that we use to establish a lot of other national figures and metrics. Is that right?
Exactly.
That's great. And is there anything in that were you surprised by that finding, or did it kind of was there surprise at just how strong that correlation was?
We were really surprised. We were not surprised about the initial correlation of 27%. I mean, that we anticipated that was going to happen. But what was really surprising was the relationship for those without a high school degree and those in rural areas, which when you look at the research on who volunteers, folks that have higher levels of education, are in higher socioeconomic strata, those are the ones that tend to volunteer more often. So we thought, well, if these folks are volunteering more, maybe they're more likely to benefit. And it's actually the exact opposite. Those that are least likely to volunteer are the ones most likely to see that gain. So I think this is a strong finding for folks, not only individuals in those circumstances, but also folks in like nonprofits, in maybe local employment agencies, that this is a whole population that doesn't tend to volunteer, that maybe would be a good opportunity to reach out to them. Great.
Hey, Robin, thanks for taking us through that. Very, very interesting. So let's change gears a little bit here and talk about the benefits and the relationship when you're looking through the lens, the relationship between volunteering and employment when looking through the lens of the nonprofit orgs. And I think this is kind of an interesting subject, and it's a little bit, it's how does volunteering fit into the nonprofit world? How does it relate to employment? It's a lot of interesting ground to cover, and to get us started, I'd like to ask Alison to talk a little bit about LinkedIn and how you're thinking about this.
Yeah, absolutely. We think about it always from a network perspective. So we think about how a nonprofit can build their presence to access more volunteers, and then how the networks of those volunteers benefit that nonprofit. So if they have a new volunteer, who are the hundreds of people that volunteer knows that they can then connect that nonprofit to, expanding their reach into future volunteers, donors, supporters, just spreading their message. And so the centerpiece of all of that really on LinkedIn is the company page. It's really just called a company page. It's any organization's page. And we, over 170,000 nonprofits have company pages on LinkedIn. 1,700, that'd be amazing. And use them to build their brand in front of professionals. And so they post constant information here to communicate with their existing community. And then the majority of action on LinkedIn occurs because one member does something, it shows up in the network update stream, and then another member copies them. And that's where the company page is so helpful for connecting with these volunteers and expanding a network, because when one member sees a company page update because they follow your nonprofit company page, they then share that with their network. Then their friend sees it and wants to go follow your company page and learn more about your organization. So that network expansion really always begins with the company page. This next slide here is what I was talking about when we were talking about individuals. This is kind of the flip side of that marketplace. So the first slide I was showing is volunteer.linkedin.com, where professionals go to find these opportunities. Nonprofits.linkedin.com shows a listing of these opportunities. It also is just full of resources on how to establish a presence on LinkedIn and connect with talent of any kind. And again, we are huge fans of the CNCS research and really use that to inform a lot of how we design what we're doing with nonprofits. And then we see our role in this community as building those tools that the nonprofits can then leverage. So I'm really walking through what some of these tools are. And our main collection of advice and resources is all at nonprofits.linkedin.com. This next slide I really think of as kind of the least appreciated, most useful part of LinkedIn that every LinkedIn member has. Next to the search bar when you're logged into LinkedIn, you see the word advanced. And if you click there, you see all of these search facets that will give you as detailed search as you want to find the right professionals for your nonprofit. So when we're working with nonprofits on how to expand their network, establish their presence, recruit talent, it's always around specific skill sets. And so we frequently have nonprofits come to us saying, I'm looking for X type of person. So they could say, you know, that they want a graphic designer who went to Cal and lives in San Francisco and works at Google. And they can plug all of that into these search facets and then find the professionals that match those requirements. And so when thinking through how to establish their community of volunteers and which volunteers will be taking on which tasks, advanced people search is always the first place that we send them. And then this next slide is really an example of advanced people search, just in a more extensive program. So we have a program called LinkedIn Board Member Connect, and it helps nonprofit leaders connect with high-quality board members. And in it, we give away a tool called Talent Finder. So Talent Finder is one of our recruiter products, and it's a more advanced version of advanced people search. And it also includes in-mails and some other features that allow you to see a larger percentage of the LinkedIn network, so that when thinking through the exact professionals that you want to volunteer or volunteer on your board, you can find them through this program. There's also a group, and I didn't talk specifically about LinkedIn groups before, but the group for Board Member Connect is a community of people sharing best practices. We frequently see groups around volunteerism as well, that, you know, one of the reasons that professionals want to volunteer is to connect with other professionals and expand their professional network so that they can access future job opportunities. So the more social opportunities that nonprofits create for their volunteers, the more they're helping them in that professional networking. So frequently we see nonprofits use LinkedIn groups for their volunteers to accomplish that goal of just helping them make greater connections to hopefully lead to future job opportunities.
That's great. Now, there's a couple of quick questions that came from the field that I just wanted to address as we went through. One listener wrote in and just asked for some examples of great ways orgs can engage skilled volunteers. And I think at the highest level, part of the relationship that we're working on with LinkedIn right now is to allow nonprofits to be more specific about the types of skills that they're looking for. And we've worked with LinkedIn, and part of our point of view on why we're excited about the relationship is that we'll increase the visibility of specific, specific opportunities that are looking for specific skills. And it'll expand it beyond just the existing volunteer match audience to include LinkedIn, and then coupled with some of the LinkedIn services where people can basically flag themselves and say, I'm interested in a volunteer opportunity and here are the skills that I have. Those two things together, I think, bodes well for the future of the field and the capacity for nonprofits to recruit the people that they need. Do you have anything you wanted to add to that, Alison?
Yeah, we have a kind of a funny example about that. So I was working with a volunteer support group in the UK, and they have a lot of professionals that they're matching with volunteer opportunities all the time. So their nonprofits are really well supported in accessing volunteers. And then there was a nonprofit who wanted to recruit someone to maintain and repair 100-year-old steam engines. So they needed a mechanical engineer, and they needed a mechanical engineer who knew how to work with these engines that are no longer in production. And so it was such a specific set of skills that they needed that it would be hard to find in their pool of volunteers. So they posted on LinkedIn, and they found a guy who's a mechanical engineer who's also a huge history buff, so he happened to have studied these engines and was a big fan of them. So they're able to connect with that more specific skill set through us.
That's great. I think it's solving the needle in the haystack problem for skilled volunteering.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. That's really, really interesting, and some great resources and some some useful tools for nonprofits, and it's great to see LinkedIn continuing to invest in that. Jill, let's move on to you and have you talk a little bit about some of the findings from Deloitte's impact survey that relates to nonprofits.
Sure, Greg. I'm going to be brief here since our survey focused more on college grads, veterans, and HR executives. But a real high-quality talent pool is available in a time when nonprofits are resource constrained. So on the next slide, just for instance, 94% of the surveyed hiring executives felt that most military veterans possess skills and experience beneficial for the workplace. And of course, some of the folks are going to like working in the nonprofit sector and are going to stay. As you'll see on the next slide, a previous year's impact survey found that the vast majority of nonprofit organizations are not capitalizing on the valuable professional skills of their volunteers. More than 3/4 of nonprofit leaders believed that skilled volunteers could significantly improve their organization's business practices. Yet, relatively few nonprofits actually put volunteers to work on these kinds of assignments.
Right.
Yeah, so in order for nonprofits to fully take advantage of skills-based volunteering, they need to offer opportunities for potential volunteers that allow them to develop skills relevant to today's marketplace and for the positions that they're seeking. And individuals should look for volunteer opportunities where the skills developed will align with a desired future employment opportunity.
Right.
And of course, volunteer bridging doesn't just help nonprofits and future employees, but it can benefit society as a whole. So I'll talk more when we get to corporations.
Well, I think this is kind of an important point to reinforce that I know Volunteer Match has done a lot of research on this subject as well, and we see from our findings that the nonprofit, executives and leaders in the nonprofit sector certainly believe that, skilled volunteering and using the skills of their volunteers is a real opportunity that would be tremendously valuable, and yet you still see a lag in nonprofits' capacity to take advantage of those skills. Do you have, in your mind, are there reasons why do you think the nonprofits are struggling to engage those types of skills?
Well, it wasn't a focus of our survey, but I think that managing skilled volunteers is clearly much more difficult work than managing traditional volunteering efforts. So it requires skills and investment from the nonprofit's perspective to be able to engage them. But indeed, there may be an opportunity to help manage skills-based volunteers with the volunteers themselves if they're very selective about finding some folks to come help them with that as well.
Right. And I will say from experience that we have sometimes struggled at Volunteer Match to effectively engage skilled volunteers. But when we do, it's always enormously valuable. But there is it's almost that fear of having, it's funny, it can feel intimidating. But as you know, Jill, our recent experience working with Deloitte to have some pro bono folks come in and work with us on a risk assessment of the Volunteer Match Network was one of the most successful skilled-based opportunities that we've ever taken advantage of. And it took us, 13 years to ask for something like that? So I guess we're getting a little bit better one day at a time.
Yeah, no, it's funny. 10 years ago, if you had asked nonprofits if they wanted pro bono help, most of them would say, don't kill me by giving me another volunteer. But now the nonprofits are clamoring for it. So I think we're at a really exciting time where nonprofits have really come to appreciate what's available to them. And now there's just those growing pains of figuring out how they can, devote the time and energy that's necessary to bring those vast amounts of resources into their organization.
Great. So let's switch gears a little bit again and move over to the corporation. And Mary and Robin, get some of your thoughts on this subject.
Yeah, actually, the conversation has nicely teed up, I think, the points that we'd like to make in terms of CNCS plays with our partners at the local level. Our national service network is largely comprised of nonprofit organizations, and one of the main roles that our AmeriCorps members can play is actually working with nonprofit organizations to build their capacity to both find volunteers, but also train them in particular areas of interest to the organization own particular missions, as well as manage them over time. So if you're a nonprofit listening to this and you're excited about, going on Volunteer Match and finding, these highly skilled volunteers, and you're convinced that these are the kind of folks that you want working with you to advance your mission at a local level, one of the ways that we can support that effort is through our AmeriCorps grant. So if you can turn to the next slide, please. In addition to providing direct services, AmeriCorps members who are placed within nonprofit organizations really help build the organizational capacity to manage volunteer programs and to manage volunteers. And as I mentioned, they play an active role in recruiting, training, and managing volunteers. So if you have a program that you want to stand up, or if you have an assessment that you want to make where you want a skilled volunteer set of folks joining you, but you don't have the time to search for them, to organize them, to get them rallied around a project, this is one important way that an AmeriCorps member can help you as a nonprofit organization. If you could turn to the next slide, please. In addition to our AmeriCorps members, I think if you're a nonprofit seeking skilled volunteers, as our co-presenters have been talking about, the Senior Corps program engages older Americans, many of whom are highly skilled. These are folks who, in many cases, have retired from professional careers. They have years of work experience, and they're seeking to use that experience in ways that will continue to give both them meaning in their retirement, but also that can be of very good use to nonprofit organizations. And lastly here, we have the Volunteer Generation Fund, which again is just another avenue if you're thinking about how to find volunteers. Funding the states to engage in volunteer recruitment and management. Next slide, please. Robin, did you want to say a word or two here on sort of linking up volunteers and nonprofits in terms of a good match, very much in line with what our co-presenter was just talking about?
Sure. I wanted to share a little bit of some of what the research can teach us about this aspect. There's something really interesting we found in some of the research that's been conducted on volunteers is that it's very intuitive that volunteers are much more successful in what they're doing, and they stick around a lot longer when they're doing activities that align with their original motivation to volunteer. And we all know that while it's hard to recruit volunteers, it's even harder to keep volunteers. Mm-hmm. And if every volunteer we recruited we wouldn't have to recruit anymore. But the fact is that volunteers, for a lot of them, it's a revolving door because they want to volunteer to do something, and they get in the door, and they start doing something, and then they lose engagement. So it's really important to keep them engaged in activities that kind of line up really closely with why they want to volunteer. Nonprofits can identify the synergies with what the volunteers are looking to do in terms of gaining employable skills and networking opportunities. If you can find opportunities to kind of align what you're looking for in the volunteer and what the volunteer is looking for in terms of the employability skills they're looking for, you're going to kind of have a win-win situation where they're going to stick around with you long term, they're going to get what they need, and potentially when they go back to work or when they find work if they're out of work or when they get a new position if they're currently employed, that's going to be a relationship that you're going to maintain over the long run.
That's great. So just being aware that volunteers are, some volunteers are there to advance their careers and learn some skills, and making sure as a nonprofit being aware of that motivation and that opportunity to support the volunteers and build a stronger relationship. I think just a final note on this section, there's a number of folks in the field that have pointed out, I think, fairly and obviously that it can be problematic if you're a nonprofit to have somebody show up who's volunteering at your organization only to get their foot in the door to ultimately get employment at a nonprofit organization. I know we've actually hired volunteers at Volunteer Match, so it's not that it doesn't happen, but I will say if somebody shows up to volunteer and they're really only there to try to get a job, that can be a tension that's not particularly beneficial to either the volunteer or to the nonprofit organization. So I think a little warning to volunteers out there going into an organization and not being honest about a desire to really volunteer, but only being there as a strategy to try to worm your way into the the employment picture can backfire. And I think there's also some people that are noting online that as nonprofits get smarter about recruiting skilled volunteers, that you don't cross the line and end up replacing paid staff with skilled volunteers, which is a kind of a perennial issue in the field. Volunteering should be complementing your advancement of the mission, not replacing existing employees. And that's one to keep in mind as we continue to push this subject along. So we've only got about 15 minutes left, or a little less than 15 minutes. This has been great research, and I think and insights into employment and volunteering. And I think the last subject we want to push into is volunteering and companies, corporate social responsibility, volunteering at companies. And I think just like in the individual space, there is, there's still a lot of lingering and unspoken tension, I think, in many companies where volunteering can be viewed sometimes by employees and sometimes by bosses as a distraction from the workplace and not necessarily complementary. And I think that's a real tension that's out there. And I think let's dig into that a little bit. And Alison, I think what's going on at LinkedIn is a little bit more about how corporations can take advantage of LinkedIn and think about the interests of their employees. But why don't you talk a little bit about what's going on at LinkedIn?
Yeah, we frequently hear from our customers about volunteerism as a role in employee engagement, so we can definitely see it growing. And so then what we do is think more about how our tools can be helpful in helping them do that. And I think that a lot of the research coming out around skill building through volunteerism can be a really important sales point to a lot of managers, that it's a good thing for their employees to be volunteering. And the tool that we use most often with employee volunteer programs is the volunteering causes section again. It's kind of interesting, all of us, I sit in the communications team, so I think everyone who works with internal communications agrees that it's always difficult to find out all the interests and passions of your employees. And so that's really how the volunteering causes section has begun to be used by corporations, is in looking up the employees who have said to their professional network that they want to volunteer, or that they want to join a nonprofit board, or just that they care about these social causes in general, and then using that information to inform programs. So through searching on LinkedIn, a volunteer program manager can find out what is the most popular cause among their employees, or what is the most popular nonprofit, and then plan events or programs that relate to those organizations or causes. And then the other thing that I think is helpful for these programs is just content that we see all the time with a lot of our employees, that they spend all day, every day working for this professional network, and they don't spend as much time reading about social causes and keeping up to date on the social sector. And so the social impact influencer channel is really helpful for that, we can send out information through there. And of course, the best thing about the whole channel is that Greg Baldwin is an influencer, so you have to hear all of his thoughts. And not just read them yourself, but also forward them on to the employees that are interested in the field.
Thanks, Alison, and thanks for the plug. Yes, please follow me on LinkedIn. And Jill, I know the Impact Survey has done a lot of work on the relationship between volunteering and the corporate workplace, particularly skilled volunteering. But I'm really interested in your research, because I think it demonstrates that volunteering isn't just a kind of a hobby after work, that it really can have beneficial impacts on the corporation and the employees. So I hope you'll want to share with us a little bit about what Deloitte has found in their research.
Absolutely, Greg. Well, on the next slide, you'll see that according to our 2013 survey, more than 3 out of every 4 HR executives take the job applicant's skilled volunteering experience into account when making hiring decisions. Seeing that experience is making candidates more desirable. And further, a majority of the HR executives also responded positively when asked about whether volunteering to develop or improve skills would be valuable or recommended. On the next slide, as corporations have grown to appreciate that doing good is often good for business, volunteering has become encouraged through corporate citizenship programs, such as my own. After reviewing the survey data, seeking to better understand the value HR executives place on volunteerism within their own organizations, It's not surprising that skills-based volunteering is regarded by most HR executives as a positive factor in their consideration of job candidates. The responses we received indicate that most HR execs consider volunteering as a positive contributor to the internal and especially external reputation of the organization, valued by their employees and beneficial for their employees. And approximately half of those respondents view it as an important element of their organization's culture. Responses indicate that most HR executives believe volunteering is beneficial to the employees, contributes towards a positive reputation. From an internal, in our 2011 survey, the findings suggest a linkage between workplace volunteerism, employee engagement, and several drivers of perception of positive corporate culture. So we really see a benefit chain here, an increase in college grads and veterans volunteering at nonprofits so they can augment their marketability for future employment could trigger a sequence of beneficial ripples that strengthen our economy. So job candidates gain employment or settle down in a nonprofit, or hopefully a combination of the two in many cases. Nonprofit organizations get to leverage more plentiful resources amongst college grads and vets. Hiring organizations get to select among better qualified, more capable pools of job candidates. And the marketplace has stronger nonprofits, and it provides a greater opportunity for those who have invested in an education, thereby reinforcing a college-going culture, which is at some risk right now with the current unemployment of so many college grads, as well as those who have put themselves in harm's way through service and are now returning to civilian life. And our country, it would be make a more productive use of talent resources, as well as reinforcing a culture of volunteerism, hopefully bolstering the economy and increasing our competitiveness. And of course, volunteering won't address all of our country's challenges, but it seems to clearly have an important role to play based on our research.
Do you think, do you have any research as to whether or not kind of the millennial generation will reverse these trends or strengthen them?
Well, reverse the trends. I would say what we've seen so far is that millennials are very much drawn to organizations that give them an opportunity to do something that they care about, that they're not influenced solely by money. Mm-hmm. So I think more and more corporations are going to see the value of this, not only in developing candidates, but bringing in candidates who care about these things. And I think the trends are going to be clearly that, we don't have research, but that nonprofits are going to realize the availability of these folks as well, because it makes perfect sense and they're resource constrained. And then I think we're already seeing LinkedIn as proof points that individuals are seeing the value, as they've got 3 million folks signing up.
That's great. So it would seem that corporations are supporting volunteering programs not just as a feel-good activity, but really as a smart business strategy, and that certainly is opening up new possibilities for the nonprofit sector to engage those programs and the talent that's represented by so many great companies across the country.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And while it's not our research, there is research out there that shows the huge benefit of having engaged employees on the impact and success of an organization.
Yeah. I just saw some new research from the University of Georgia that goes even further and says that volunteering, they go so far as to say it actually makes employees more productive at work when they have a healthy kind of volunteer life that is complementing their work life. But that's for a future webinar. We'll dig into that one. And then I want to finally turn the platform back over to the corporation to give some final thoughts on this subject from the Corporation for National Community Service and what some of their kind of advice and perspective on this is.
Yeah, sure. I think it's clear from a lot of the research that that's been done on volunteering and that we've talked about today that employers should be considering the volunteer experience of job candidates. I mean, it's clearly something that's important. When researchers have looked at what skills and employability gains are made by individuals who volunteer, I mean, if they find that volunteers are getting skills and becoming more employable, volunteers are increasing their social ties, which is always an asset for companies and for nonprofits. Again, it sends a signal of interpersonal skills and communication skills. So I just think there's a lot of evidence out there for both for the volunteers to go and volunteer and reflect that volunteer experience in their resumes and in their discussions for work. And then on the employer side, for corporations and nonprofits hiring, to dig deeper into what those volunteer experiences look like. You know, not every volunteer experience is the same. You could volunteer once a week, once a month, once a year, and those experiences are going to be different. It's not flat. So I think it's really important for, as an employer, to kind of keep that in mind and probe in job interviews and phone screenings what those volunteers' experiences were. And that will really help value volunteering from that perspective and help volunteers and help nonprofits in bringing on volunteers to kind of increase their importance.
Hey, Robin, quick question from the field. Do you have any data on the relationship between employment and volunteering for high schoolers? Did your research, is it just 18 plus?
Our research, I believe our data set started at 16.
Got it.
So one thing we can say is that there wasn't a lot of differences across age groups for the effect of volunteering, in that volunteering has a strong relationship with finding work for all age groups. I think that for those that are in high school, finishing high school, I think it's clear that that's an important step in the door to kind of start your pathway.
Mm-hmm. I think that's great. Well, I wish we had another hour and a half to continue to field some of the questions that have been coming in. We've covered some of them as we've gone through, I think there are a couple of questions. Once a volunteer finds a job, what are some ways they can continue to help an organization? I think that the basic thrust of this research and what we're seeing emerge from the field is that volunteering and employment is less like oil and water and more like peanut butter and chocolate. They go really well together. They complement each other. Whether you're a corporation or an individual, those things are two complementary forces that are strengthening your prospects, both to advance your career, but also being very helpful to the nonprofit sector and to the organizations that you're serving. And that's really terrific news. So I want to say a huge thank you to all of our presenters for taking the time out of their busy schedules to come and talk with us about this. And with the last 30 seconds, turn it back over to Lauren for a little bit of housekeeping and to tell you about some of the upcoming webinars that we have in the next month.
Great, thanks, Greg, and thank you so much to all of our presenters. Really appreciate you taking the time to be here for this conversation this morning. Just to wrap things up, to remind you that there are some other ways to stay informed and up to date with Volunteer Match other than just our webinars. So the first way for the corporate audience anyways, we have our Volunteering is DSR blog. You can follow us on Twitter at VM_solutions and also sign up for our monthly Good Companies newsletter. For you nonprofits and individual volunteers on the line, you can follow us on our blog at engagingvolunteers.org, on Twitter at VolunteerMatch, and signing up for our Good Causes and Good People newsletters, which you can sign up for on our blog or on volunteermatch.org. Just a heads up for our next webinar coming up on February 19th, we're going to be diving into global volunteerism, so talking about what considerations you should take before launching an international employee volunteering program. And we'll be joined by Amanda MacArthur, who's the Vice President of Global Pro Bono and Engagement from Pixera Global, and also Vicki Hush, who is Volunteer Match's Vice President of Strategic Partnerships. So that about wraps us up for this morning. So thank you again to everybody on the call for joining us. This was definitely our most successful webinar that we've had yet. And a big thank you to the presenters and to Greg for helping us to moderate everything.
Terrific, and everyone will get a copy of the presentation?
Yes. Yes, everybody will get a copy of the slides and also a link to the recorded webinar as an automatic follow-up after the event this morning. All right. Thanks.
All right, terrific. And if there's other feedback that you want to send our way, please feel free to contact us, and we hope we'll have you join us again on the Volunteer Match webinar series. Thanks very much.
Bye. Okay, this is really great.